Line with us is Phil Ittner. He's the veteran war correspondent, American war correspondent, who is based in Kyiv, Ukraine. He has a video blog over on YouTube. To find it, his name is spelled Philip, P-H-I-L-I-P, Ittner, I-T-T-N-E-R, and you can track it down. That's also his Twitter handle, by the way, Philip Ittner. Phil, welcome back to the program. How are you doing, and what's the situation in Ukraine today, in Kyiv, I guess specifically, but then more generally across the country?
Well, Tom, good to be back. We had a little cold snap the last couple of days, but today is lovely and bright, and spring has sprung yet again. That is not just a meteorological report. That is also important because we do anticipate a counteroffensive happening sometime soon. The Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Reznikov, has announced that he anticipates launching the counteroffensive sometime in April, mid to late April, or the beginning to the middle of May. So about a 1 month period, there, a 60-day period from the middle of April to the middle of May, when basically armor will be able to maneuver. And we do know that a lot of the promised NATO equipment is actually physically here, whether that's Stryker infantry fighting vehicles or Bradley fighting vehicles from America, or the Challenger 2 from Britain, or Leopard 2s from around Europe. They are here. They have arrived. And so once the ground gets to a position where it's not soggy and muddy as it has been for the last several weeks, that we could see a massive counteroffensive. So that's really important. There's a struggle within the church. There's very disturbing news coming out of Russia, but a number of topics, and any which one of them you're interested in, I'm happy to talk to you about. Yeah,
when I lived in Vermont and in New Hampshire, we had this thing called mud season, which we did not have when I grew up in Michigan. And it's where the dirt roads, the top layer would thaw, but 6 inches or a foot down, the ground would still be frozen. And so the water didn't have anywhere to go. So the dirt roads turned literally into mud. They were impassable for sometimes a week or two. Here. Is it? Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Very simple. They call it the Rasputitsa. It is just, it's just mud that can't, as you explained, it's just this layer of mud that it just sucks you in, and it makes maneuver near impossible. So once that's out of the way, it looks like the Ukrainians will take advantage of it, and we'll start to see some movement.
So meanwhile, one of the big news stories about Russia, outside of the fact that Donald Trump just started criticizing Ron DeSantis for supporting Ukraine, which is, Donald Trump's so in the bag for Putin. Isn't it obvious to everybody that this guy is owned by Vladimir Putin and has been forever? But now Russia has just arrested a Wall Street Journal reporter and charged him with espionage. Is this their way of saying, how dare you report anything out of this country? Is this the further closing of Russia to news?
Well, a lot of people, what this actually is, if this is, first and foremost, he was arrested out in Ekaterinburg because apparently he was making inquiries to do a report about the Wagner Group, which is this mercenary group that's been used during this war. And the Russian authorities say that they caught him, quote unquote, red-handed. There's a lot of suspicion about this because, it's just how they operate, frankly. They're signaling to the rest of be careful what you do. We have crossed a line. We will not hesitate to arrest accredited journalists from foreign news outlets. And I remember being in Russia in the 90s, and that was always a line that we all in the press corps said amongst ourselves: if they start rounding us up, if they start, if they arrest one of us, it won't be long before they're starting to come for all of us.
Right.
So this is a very dangerous message to the international press corps. and whether or not they'll stay inside Russia or whether it's just going to get too dangerous to do, accurate reporting that doesn't turn a blind eye to the ill acts of what's happening inside Russia. I mean, there are tons of horrible stories from inside Russia. There's a 13-year-old girl whose father was arrested because she did a Crayola depiction that was sympathetic to Ukraine. So her father is facing 2 years in prison. I mean, it's crazy stuff. There's all sorts of really bad stories coming out of Russia right now. So are they going to try and crack down on the International Press Corps? Well, the arrest of this Wall Street Journal guy, his name is Evan try and get it right, Gershkovich. Because you got to say their names, because if he's going to sit in prison, we got to do something about it. But what does the rest of the press corps do? And it's deeply troubling. It's deeply troubling.
Yeah. Well, it's an autocracy. It's an oligarchic autocracy, which is the form of government, apparently, that Donald Trump thinks we should have here in the United States. And not just him. I mean, sadly, a large contingent of the GOP. You mentioned the Wagner Group, or Wagner Group, if you want to Americanize it. It starts with a W, but W's are pronounced like V's in German and Russian. One day I hear a story that the Wagner Group is disintegrating, and Prigozhin is the guy's name who runs it.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yevgeny Prigozhin.
Yeah, and then Prigozhin is, on the verge of being arrested and executed. And then the next day I read an article that, the Wagner Group is leading the victorious, et cetera. What's the real story here with this little mercenary group? And have they also, like the Russian army itself, the regular army, resorted to using, convicted murderers and rapists, letting them out of prison if they'll just go fight on the front lines?
Well, that's what the Wagner Group, or the Wagner Group, whichever you prefer, has done in the past. They've taken guys out of prison and they put them in the front line. Without getting too dense into it, Tom, I'll see if I can do this precisely so that your audience can maybe get some insight. There's a long-standing history of what happens internally when things are not going Russia's way. And one of the things that has been done in the past is that the ultimate leadership, because Russia has always been an autocracy, so they've always had a czar, or they've had the premier, or the head of the Politburo, and of course now they have Putin. And when the stress starts to come onto Russian society, what that leader does oftentimes is he separates himself from the second leadership, what are called the boyars under the czarist system, or would be apparatchiks within the Communist Party, and now it's the kind of strong men who run the military, the intelligence community, or the oligarchs, or whatever, under Putin. All of this is to say that they separate themselves from that, and then they let the sharks circle below them. And that allows them to disassociate from all the ills that are causing problems for the Russians. And then once the infighting happens, oftentimes created by the leadership to again disassociate himself from all the kind of madness. Then when the fighting ends, then the leader comes back in and says, "Are you guys done fighting? We got to, okay, now I'm going to resume my leadership." And what that does is it enables the Russian people to say, well, it's not the leader's fault. It's not the leader's fault. It's all these corrupt guys right beneath him. And it plays into the mentality. There's a really strong mentality of if the czar only knew, if the leadership only knew. It's clearly not Putin's fault. It's all these corrupt, incompetent guys below him. And that allows him to stay relatively safe and on top. And hopefully once the infighting on the secondary level is ended, and then hopefully the whatever is causing stress to the Russian state can be resolved. But this is typical of Russia. And you have Prigozhin and the Wagner guys going up against the Minister of Defense, Shoigu. You've got fighting on all sorts of different levels, and then Putin just can sit on top of it, and he's not directly at risk. The problem with this is Ukraine is going to win this war. And so the stress is not going to be alleviated no matter who comes up top dog in that fighting on that secondary level. So, you know, there's a lot of disruption coming in Russia, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again. As horrible as this war is, I don't think this is the real crisis. I think the crisis is going to come when Russia loses this war, and they will have to deal with the consequences of having engaged in this war. So. Yeah. We got some tough times ahead, not just this war, Tom.
Yeah, I totally get it. Phil Ittner, you can check out his video blog over on YouTube. Phil, thanks so much for dropping by today. It's always great talking with you.